Hey, everyone. I'm not really sure how to start this, but I just need to get this off my chest. My name's Henry. I'm 44, married for now, I guess, to Becky, 42. We've got one daughter, Holly, who's 16. Life was going pretty good, or so I thought, until a few weeks ago when everything flipped upside down. About 3 years ago, we moved into this cozy little neighborhood in the suburbs. Becky and I were looking for a fresh start, something quieter for Holly, and maybe honestly, a little escape from city life. Right from the beginning, it felt perfect. Everyone here was so friendly. We hit it off especially well with our neighbors, Matt and Pam. They were just a few years younger than us, no kids yet, but they were fun and always inviting us over for BBQs or drinks. It felt like we finally had a community. Matt would help me with stuff like fixing the fence or cleaning out the gutters, and Pam and Becky got along like they'd been best friends forever. Even Holly liked it here, something I was worried about since teenagers aren't usually fans of big changes. Fast forward to a couple of months ago, I started noticing Becky pulling away. At first, I thought she was just stressed. She works part-time as a photographer and had been taking on more jobs lately, or so she said. I'd come home, and she'd be glued to her phone or saying she was heading out to meet Pam for a girls' night. I didn't think much of it. I trusted her, and why wouldn't I? After all, we were supposed to be happy here, building this dream life together. Then came last Saturday. Becky was in the kitchen making coffee while I was scrolling on my phone. Out of nowhere, she said, "Henry, we need to talk." Now, any married person knows that sentence never leads anywhere good. But I didn't expect what came next. She told me she's been seeing someone else for nearly a year. She said it like she was announcing a change in the weather, not dropping a bomb on our entire life. I froze. All I could say was, "What?" She went on, claiming it wasn't about me, that she needed this for herself, that it made her feel alive again. I was still stuck on the timeline. A year. She'd been lying to my face, playing the perfect wife and mom, and all the while sneaking around behind my back. I couldn't even speak. I just sat there like an idiot, letting her keep talking. "It doesn't change anything between us," she said. Can you believe that? Like her affair was supposed to be some harmless side hobby. And the kicker? She planned to take a trip to Hawaii with this guy. A friend's getaway was how she'd pitched it to me weeks ago. I even found out she asked Holly to keep the whole thing quiet. She roped our daughter into her web of lies. I asked her who it was. That's when she dropped the next bomb. It's Mr. Harrington, Holly's math teacher. A guy I'd shaken hands with, thanked at parent-teacher conferences. My stomach turned. This wasn't just betrayal, this was nuclear-level betrayal. After Becky dropped her little truth bomb, I think I went into shock. I couldn't even yell or cry. My mind was racing. How do you respond to something like that? Your wife of 20 years tells you she's been cheating, and not just with some random guy, but with someone who's supposed to be a role model for your kid. Becky stood there, arms crossed, acting like she was the victim. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said. "But Henry, I haven't been happy. You've been so focused on work and I just needed something for me." She hadn't been happy? What about me? I've been working 50-hour weeks trying to make sure we can afford the mortgage, Holly's school activities, and whatever new project Becky decided to pick up. I guess I just never realized one of those projects was screwing Holly's teacher. I asked her how long she thought she could keep this up. She shrugged. "I don't know. I thought maybe you wouldn't notice. It's not like I was planning to leave you." I don't know what broke me more, the fact that she thought it was okay to carry on like this, or that she expected me to sit there and take it. Then she started talking about Hawaii, saying she'd still planned to go but maybe it was best if she canceled now. Like she was doing me a favor. "No, you're going," I said. "You're going because I want you out of this house for a while." She seemed surprised, like she didn't expect me to push back. But I wasn't about to let her sit there and pretend everything was normal. That night, I barely slept. I couldn't even look at her, let alone share the same bed. I ended up on the couch, staring at the ceiling and replaying the whole conversation in my head. How did we get here? How did the woman I promised to spend my life with turn into a stranger? The next morning, I had to face Holly. She must have known something was up because I'd never been so quiet around her. She came into the kitchen and said, "Dad, are you okay?" I tried to play it off, but she gave me that look, the one Becky used to give me when she knew I was lying. "Is it about Mom?" she asked. I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" I asked. Holly hesitated, then said, I know about her and Mr. Harrington. I nearly fell off my chair. My 16-year-old daughter had been keeping this secret, covering for her mom, and God knows how much it's been eating her up inside. How long have you known? I asked. She wouldn't look at me. A couple of months. Mom said it wasn't a big deal, and I didn't want to make things worse. I didn't know whether to be angry or heartbroken. Becky not only betrayed me, but she dragged Holly into it, making her lie and cover for her. My hands were shaking. I told Holly, this isn't your fault, okay? You shouldn't have been put in that position. She nodded, but I could tell she felt guilty anyway. And honestly, so did I. I'd been so busy working and trusting Becky that I missed all the signs. Now my daughter had been pulled into this mess, and I couldn't undo it. After my talk with Holly, I couldn't stay in the house. The walls felt like they were closing in. Becky was upstairs pretending like everything was fine, and I couldn't stand the sight of her. I told Holly I needed to run an errand and drove aimlessly for about an hour. I ended up at a park a few towns over, just sitting in my car, trying to process everything. How do you even begin to deal with something like this? My wife cheated. My daughter was dragged into it. And the guy, Mr. Harrington? Every time I thought about him, my blood boiled. I trusted that man. I let him teach my daughter, gave him handshakes and compliments, and meanwhile, he was tearing my family apart. When I got home, Becky was waiting in the living room. She had heard serious talk face on, like she wanted to smooth things over. We need to figure out how to move forward, she said. I laughed. Not a normal laugh, a bitter hollow one that made her flinch. Move forward. I said. Becky, you've been cheating on me for a year. With Holly's teacher. You lied to me. You lied to her. And now you want to move forward, like this is some speed bump. She started crying. Not the kind of tears you shed when you're sorry, but the kind you use to manipulate. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, she sobbed. I was just trying to find myself. Find yourself. I snapped. Did you lose yourself in his bed? That shut her up for a second, but she bounced back quick. She started blaming me. You're always at work. You never pay attention to me anymore. I've been feeling invisible for years. Oh, so this is my fault? I asked. You couldn't talk to me? You couldn't say you were unhappy? Instead, you jumped into an affair and dragged our daughter into it. She tried to twist it, saying she only asked Holly to keep quiet so I wouldn't overreact. It was better for everyone, she claimed. Better for who, Becky? I said. You? Him? It sure wasn't better for Holly. Or me. That night, I told her I was done. Not officially, not yet. I couldn't leave Holly right now, not while she was caught in the middle of all this. But emotionally? I checked out. I told Becky I'd stay for Holly's sake until she went to college, but after that, I was gone. No negotiation. No therapy. Just done. Becky didn't take it well. She kept trying to argue, saying we could work through this if I gave her a chance. But every word out of her mouth was another excuse, another lie. I couldn't trust her anymore, and I wasn't about to pretend otherwise. A couple of days later, I got a call from Matt. He and Pam had heard that something was off, probably from Becky trying to save face. Matt invited me over for a beer, and I figured, why not? I needed someone to talk to who wasn't directly involved. When I got there, Matt handed me a cold one and said, "So, what's going on with you and Becky?" I hesitated. How do you even begin to explain something like this? Finally, I said, "She's been cheating on me. For a year. With Holly's teacher." Matt nearly spit out his beer. Wait, what? Mr. Harrington? Are you serious? Dead serious, I said. And then for the first time since this all started, I just let it out. I told him everything, how Becky confessed, how Holly knew, how Becky was trying to make me feel like it was my fault. By the time I finished, Matt looked like he'd been hit by a truck. "Man, that's messed up," he said. "I don't even know what to say." Pam came into the room a few minutes later, and Matt filled her in. She looked horrified, but there was something off about her reaction, like she wasn't entirely surprised. "What?" I asked her. "Do you know something?" Pam hesitated, then said, "I didn't want to say anything, but I've seen Becky with him. At the coffee shop. A couple of times. I thought maybe it was work-related, but now Hearing that felt like another punch to the gut. Becky hadn't just been sneaky, she'd been bold. Meeting him in public, right under everyone's noses. I couldn't decide if I was more angry or embarrassed. Probably both. Hearing Pam admit she'd seen Becky with Mr. Harrington hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt like an idiot, like everyone in town probably knew more about my life than I did. Matt and Pam tried to reassure me, but their awkward looks only made it worse. It was like they didn't know whether to feel sorry for me or ashamed that they hadn't said something sooner. On the drive home, I kept thinking about how many people might have known. Did the other parents whisper about it at school events? Did the neighbors notice Becky acting strange? I'd been so blind, so trusting. Now it felt like the entire foundation of my life was crumbling under me. When I got back, Becky was in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone. She looked up and gave me this half-hearted smile, like she wanted to act normal. "How was Matt?" she asked. I ignored her and went straight upstairs. I wasn't in the mood for her fake attempts at small talk. But as I was heading to bed, my phone buzzed. It was Matt. "Matt, hey, don't want to stir the pot, but Pam just remembered something else." Apparently, Becky mentioned to her a while back that Harrington was helping Holly with extra tutoring. Thought you should know. My stomach churned. Extra tutoring? Was this guy using my daughter as some kind of excuse to get closer to Becky? The thought made my skin crawl. I texted Matt back a quick thanks and put my phone down, but I couldn't sleep. I needed to get to the bottom of this. The next morning, I waited until Holly came down for breakfast. I didn't want to scare her, but I also couldn't let this slide. "Hey Hole," I said casually. "About that tutoring Mr. Harrington was doing. When did that start?" Holly froze, her spoon halfway to her mouth. I don't know. A few months ago, I guess." "Did your mom arrange it?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Yeah," she said, avoiding my eyes. "She said it'd be good for my grades." "Did it help?" I pressed. She shrugged. "I mean, yeah, he's a good teacher. But it was weird. Like, he'd always ask about Mom. He'd say stuff like, 'Your mom's so talented,' or 'Your mom's the coolest.' It felt off." Hearing that confirmed what I was already starting to suspect. This wasn't just about Becky cheating. Harrington had been using Holly as part of his game. It made me sick to my stomach. That night, I confronted Becky again. "What the hell were you thinking, involving Holly in this?" I demanded. She acted confused, playing dumb like she always does when she's cornered. "What are you talking about?" "The tutoring," I said. "You used it as an excuse to spend more time with Harrington, didn't you?" Her face turned red, and for a second, I thought she might admit it. But instead, she got defensive. "Don't twist this, Henry. Holly needed help, and he offered. I was just trying to be a good mom." "A good mom?" I laughed bitterly. "A good mom doesn't use her kid as a pawn in her affair." Becky stormed off, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I stayed up late that night, replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out how I could protect Holly from any more of this mess. The next day, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Harrington get away with this. I didn't care if it made things awkward at school or in the neighborhood. I needed to confront him. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting my daughter and making sure this guy didn't think he could get away with destroying my family. After hearing what Pam said, I felt like the last shred of my old life was slipping away. This wasn't just some private betrayal anymore. It was public. People had seen them together. God knows who else knew. It was like I couldn't even claim ignorance. Like I'd been the fool this whole time, the guy who didn't see what was right in front of him. Matt and Pam tried to comfort me, but it felt hollow. They didn't have answers, just sympathy and awkward pats on the back. Pam offered to talk to Becky, to get her side, but I shut that down immediately. "I already know her side," I said. "She's been telling me her version of the truth for years. I don't need more lies." On the drive home, I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head. The looks Becky and Mr. Harrington probably exchanged at Holly's school events, the whispered conversations, the lies she must have told to make all this happen without me catching on. It made me sick. When I got home, Becky was sitting at the dining table, scrolling on her phone like nothing was wrong. The sight of her so calm, so casual, made something snap inside me. "So when were you planning to tell me you and Harrington had public meetups?" I asked. Her head shot up. "What are you talking about?" "I talked to Pam," I said. She saw you with him at the coffee shop. Were you two just chatting about algebra? Becky flushed but kept her composure. It wasn't like that. We were just meeting up to talk. That's all. That's all, I repeated, mocking her. You've been talking for a year, Becky. What else do you need to discuss that couldn't wait for your next romantic getaway? She looked away, fidgeting with her phone. I told you, it wasn't about love or anything like that. It was just something I needed. Needed? I said. You needed to betray your family? To drag Holly into your mess? Do you even hear yourself? She didn't respond. Instead, she got up and walked away, muttering something about me making it worse. Like this was my fault. That night, I started putting my own plans in motion. If Becky wanted to play dirty, I could play smart. I made a list of everything that needed sorting before I could leave. Finances, the house, custody arrangements for Holly when she was home from college. It wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. I wasn't going to let her ruin my life any more than she already had. A few days later, I had a meeting with a lawyer. I told her everything, from the affair to the emotional toll it was taking on Holly. The lawyer was sympathetic but straightforward. If you're planning to wait until Holly goes to college, you'll need to tread carefully. Document everything: texts, emails, even conversations. If this goes to court, you'll need proof. Hearing that was a gut punch. I hated the idea of living like some private investigator in my own marriage, but I knew she was right. If Becky decided to turn this into a battle, I needed to be ready. Meanwhile, things with Holly were getting harder. She was quieter than usual, spending more time in her room or out with friends. One night, I knocked on her door and asked if we could talk. She shrugged. About what? About everything, I said. I know this isn't easy for you. I just want you to know I'm here, no matter what. She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed. Why didn't you see it, Dad? How did you not know? I didn't have an answer. I trusted her, I said finally. I wanted to believe she'd never do something like this. Holly nodded, but didn't say anything else. It was clear she was struggling with her own feelings of betrayal, not just from Becky, but maybe from me too. The days after my talk with Holly were some of the hardest. I could see the pain in her face every time we crossed paths. She wasn't just hurt, she was disappointed. And the worst part? I couldn't fix it. Becky had destroyed something in Holly that I couldn't glue back together, no matter how hard I tried. Meanwhile, Becky was acting like this was some kind of growing pain for the family. She started cooking more elaborate meals, trying to chat with me about my day, even suggesting we watch movies together as a family. I couldn't stomach it. One evening, as she set the table, I finally asked, "What are you doing?" She blinked. "Setting up dinner?" "No, Becky. I mean, what are you doing pretending everything's fine? You can't just cook lasagna and think that fixes this." She set the plate down a little harder than necessary. "I'm trying, Henry. I know I messed up, but at least I'm making an effort." "An effort to what? Pretend this never happened?" I asked. "Because that's what it feels like." Her face hardened. "Maybe I'm trying to save what's left of this family. Did you ever think of that?" I shook my head. "You didn't care about saving this family when you were sneaking off with Harrington." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Instead, she stormed off, leaving the plates half set on the table. That night, Holly came downstairs while I was cleaning up the unfinished dinner mess. She sat at the kitchen counter, quiet for a while, then said, "You know she's trying, right?" I paused, mid-swipe with the dish towel. "Trying to do what, Holly?" "Rewrite the past." "She keeps saying it wasn't serious. That it didn't mean anything," Holly said, her voice small. I stopped what I was doing and looked at her. "Do you believe that?" She shrugged. "I don't know. I just want things to go back to normal." I sighed and walked around the counter to sit next to her. "Me too, kiddo. But I don't think they can. Not after this." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. Instead, she nodded and got up to leave. "I'm going to bed." The next day, Becky dropped another bomb. She told me she had already canceled the Hawaii trip, for the sake of the family, she said. She expected me to applaud her, like this was some grand gesture of goodwill. But honestly, it just made me angrier. "Why now?" I asked. "Why not before you planned it? Before you told Holly to lie for you?" She sighed, exasperated. Because I thought I could keep things separate. I didn't think it would affect you or Holly. That's the problem, Becky, I said. You didn't think about us at all. She didn't have a response. Just turned and walked away, muttering something about me being impossible to talk to. A week later, I had my first run-in with Mr. Harrington. I was picking Holly up from school, and there he was, standing by the entrance, chatting with some parents like he wasn't a complete piece of garbage. My hands clenched around the steering wheel, and for a second, I thought about confronting him right there in front of everyone. But then I saw Holly coming out of the building, her eyes darting nervously between me and him. She knew. She knew what I wanted to do, and the last thing I wanted was to make things harder for her. So, I took a deep breath and waved her over. Let's go, I said, keeping my eyes on the road as we drove away. Thanks for not, she said after a few minutes of silence. I didn't do it for him, I said. I did it for you. After the encounter at Holly's school, I started to see just how much this was affecting her. She was quieter than ever, barely engaging in conversations and spending most of her time holed up in her room. It wasn't just teenage moodiness anymore, this was deeper. She was carrying the weight of her mom's betrayal, and I didn't know how to help her. One evening, I knocked on her door. Holly, can we talk? Yeah, she said, her voice muffled. I walked in to find her sitting cross-legged on her bed, her phone in her hand but not really looking at it. How are you holding up? I asked, sitting down in her desk chair. She shrugged. I'm fine. Holly, I said gently, you don't have to be fine. It's okay to be upset. She looked up at me, her eyes glassy. I just don't get it, Dad. How could she do this? To you? To us? I didn't have an easy answer. I don't know, kiddo. I wish I did. I feel so stupid, she said. Like I knew, but I didn't say anything. Maybe if I had. Hey, I cut her off. None of this is your fault. Your mom made her choices. This isn't on you. She nodded, but I could tell she didn't fully believe me. I just want things to go back to how they were. Me too, I said. But sometimes when things break, you can't put them back the way they were. You just move forward piece by piece. Holly didn't say anything after that. She just leaned her head on my shoulder for a minute before mumbling that she needed to finish her homework. I left her room feeling more helpless than ever. A couple of days later, Becky decided it was time for another family discussion. She cornered me in the kitchen after Holly had gone to bed. Henry, we need to talk about what's next. I leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. What's next as I focus on Holly and make sure she gets through this? And us, she asked. What about our marriage? There is no us, Becky, I said bluntly. I'm staying for Holly, but once she's off to college, we're done. She frowned, tears welling up in her eyes. You can't mean that. We've been through so much together. And you threw it all away, I said. You made your choice when you decided to cheat, and I've made mine. She reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back. Henry, I'm sorry. I really am. I know I messed up, but I love you. I shook my head. You don't do this to someone you love, Becky. You don't destroy your family and then expect everything to be fine because you suddenly feel guilty. Her tears turned to frustration. So what? You're just going to hold this over me forever? Punish me by staying but not really staying? No, I said. I'm giving Holly some stability. That's more than you've done. The next day, I decided it was time to start preparing for the inevitable. I began keeping a record of everything. Texts, emails, even little notes about conversations I had with Becky or Holly. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I wasn't going to be blindsided if one came. I also started secretly setting aside money, knowing I'd need it for my fresh start once Holly was out of the house. Becky, on the other hand, seemed to think that if she just kept playing the role of the perfect wife and mom, things would eventually smooth over. She cooked dinners, volunteered at Holly's school, and even started leaving little notes for me like she used years ago. But it all felt hollow, like she was performing rather than actually trying to make amends. A week later, Holly came home from school looking more upset than usual. What's wrong? I asked. Mr. Harrington's been acting weird, she said. Weird how? She hesitated. Like, he keeps asking if I'm okay. And he's been kind of hovering. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my cool. Has he said anything inappropriate? No, she said quickly. But it's just awkward. That was the last straw. I wasn't about to let that man make my daughter uncomfortable on top of everything else. "I'll take care of it," I told her. Holly's comment about Mr. Harrington hovering pushed me over the edge. I'd been trying to stay calm for her sake, but now it wasn't just about me or Becky, it was about protecting my daughter. I couldn't let that man keep inserting himself into her life, making her feel uneasy. Enough was enough. The next morning, I made a plan. I wasn't going to do anything reckless or make a scene at school, but I needed to have a conversation with Harrington, man to man. Or maybe man to rat, since that's what he felt like to me. I waited until the end of the school day. Holly had a ride with a friend, so I knew she wouldn't be around to see me. I parked outside the school and waited by the entrance. When Harrington finally walked out, looking smug as ever in his tweed jacket, I stepped in his path. "Mr. Harrington," I said, my voice steady but firm. He stopped, startled. "Oh, Mr. Harper. I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Yeah, well, we need to talk," I said. "Privately." He glanced around, clearly nervous. "I'm not sure that's appropriate." "I'm not asking," I said, stepping closer. "Now." We ended up in the parking lot, away from the other teachers and students. I could see the nervous sweat starting to form on his forehead. Good. He should be nervous. "Look," I said, "I know everything. About you and Becky. About the lies, the meetings, the whole damn affair." He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "Save it. I don't want your excuses, and I don't need your apology. You've already destroyed enough. But now, you're making my daughter uncomfortable, and that stops today. Mr. Harper, Don't," I snapped. "Don't try to defend yourself. You don't get to justify what you did. You betrayed your students, your job, and my family. And now you think it's okay to check in on my daughter? She doesn't need you. She doesn't want you. Leave her alone." He looked pale, like he wanted to sink into the asphalt. "I didn't mean to." "Didn't mean to what? Sleep with my wife? Ruin my family? Get my daughter caught in the crossfire?" I stepped closer, my voice low and cold. "Stay away from her. Do your job and nothing more. Because if I hear you've been so much as breathing in her direction, I won't just come to talk next time." He nodded, stammering something that sounded like agreement. I didn't care. I just turned and walked away, leaving him standing there like the pathetic excuse for a man he was. When I got home, Holly was in the kitchen doing her homework. She looked up when I walked in, a little wary. "Did you do something?" I shook my head. "Nothing you need to worry about. But if Harrington gives you any trouble, you tell me right away." "Okay." She nodded, relief washing over her face. "Okay." That evening, Becky came into the living room while I was watching TV. She sat down next to me, too close for comfort. "Holly told me you went to the school today." "Yeah, I did," I said without looking at her. "What did you do?" she asked, her tone suspicious. "I told Harrington to back off." "That's it." Her eyes widened. "Henry, you can't just—" "I can and I did," I interrupted. "He's made his choices, and now he's facing the consequences. If you've got a problem with that, take it up with him." Becky looked like she wanted to argue, but she stayed quiet. Good. I wasn't in the mood for another one of her justifications. Becky cornered me the next morning. "Henry, we need to talk." I sighed. "About what?" "Holly told me about Harrington. I don't want things to escalate." I stared at her. "Escalate? You're worried about him? After everything?" "It's not like that," she said quickly. "I just don't want you doing something you'll regret." I laughed bitterly. "Regret? Becky, I regret trusting you. I regret thinking you cared about this family." She flinched, but her voice stayed calm. "I made a mistake. I'm trying to fix it." "Fix it?" I snapped. "You can't fix this, Becky. You shattered it." For once, she didn't have a comeback. She just stood there, her eyes glassy, as I walked away. Later, Holly thanked me. "He's been keeping his distance," she said. "It's better." That was all I needed to hear. I'd drawn the line, and Harrington knew not to cross it. A week passed quietly, or so I thought. One evening, I was sorting through some bills when I found an unfamiliar credit card statement. It was in Becky's name, listing charges for fancy dinners, hotel stays, and Hawaii flights. I confronted her immediately. "You canceled the trip, huh?" Her face went pale. Henry, You never canceled it, I said, shaking the paper. Were you planning to reschedule? Or just hoping I wouldn't notice? She tried to deny it, but broke down under pressure. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. Scared of losing your affair? I snapped. Because you already lost your family. I didn't stick around to hear her excuses. I grabbed my keys and left, needing space to cool off. After Becky's latest lie, I stopped engaging. I didn't argue, I didn't ask questions. I just shut down. My focus shifted entirely to Holly and preparing for the future. Becky noticed and tried to reel me back in with forced kindness, cooking dinners, offering to watch movies, even buying me a new watch. One night she said, "Henry, can we at least try? For Holly's sake." "For Holly's sake, I'm staying," I replied coldly. "But us?" "There's nothing left, Becky." Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. She'd made her bed, and I was done trying to lie in it. Meanwhile, I quietly met with my lawyer again. "Start drafting the paperwork," I told her. "I'll file the day Holly leaves for college." It felt like a weight lifting. I had a plan, and I wasn't going to let Becky derail it. Holly started spending more time out with friends, coming home later than usual. One evening I asked her, "Everything okay?" She hesitated. "Yeah, just needed space." I could tell the strain of everything was catching up with her. "If you ever want to talk, I'm here," I said. She nodded, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks, Dad." It hurt to see her pulling away, but I couldn't blame her. She was stuck in the middle of a mess she didn't create. That weekend, Becky tried to initiate a family dinner, saying we needed to reconnect. Holly glanced at me, then muttered, "I already made plans," and left the table. Becky looked devastated, but I stayed quiet. She was reaping what she'd sown. When Becky found out about Holly wanting to transfer schools, she confronted me. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" she demanded. "Because this isn't about you," I replied. "Holly needs a fresh start." "She doesn't need to run away," Becky argued. "We should face this as a family." "A family?" I scoffed. "You tore that apart, Becky. Holly's doing what's best for her, and I'm supporting her." She looked hurt, but I wasn't going to entertain her anymore. Holly came first now. Becky spent the next few days hovering around Holly, trying to convince her to stay. But Holly stood her ground, and I made sure Becky didn't guilt-trip her into changing her mind. As Holly's transfer plans moved forward, I started preparing for my eventual exit. I sorted through finances, listed the house's potential value, and began setting aside money. Quietly, I also started looking for apartments closer to where Holly's new school would be. Meanwhile, Becky tried harder to act like the perfect wife. She suggested counseling, family vacations, and even started leaving notes in my lunch bag again. Each gesture felt like a slap in the face. Too little, too late. One night, she asked, "Henry, are you really not willing to give us another chance?" "No, Becky," I said simply. "You gave up that chance the moment you lied." Her face crumpled, but I didn't stay to see the tears. I was past the point of feeling sorry for her. Holly's transfer date was set for the following month, and I began counting down the days, not just for her fresh start but for mine as well. The weeks leading up to Holly's transfer were a delicate balancing act. I kept everything civil on the surface, but beneath it all, I was seething. Becky's attempts to play the perfect wife were exhausting. Every time she left a note, cooked a meal, or tried to connect, it felt more like manipulation than remorse. She was desperate to pull me back into the fantasy she was trying to rebuild, but I couldn't forget the reality she'd shattered. One evening, Becky cornered me in the living room. Holly was out with friends, so it was just the two of us. She sat across from me, her hands clasped tightly, her voice trembling. "Henry, I can't lose this family. I can't lose you." I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. "You lost us the moment you decided we weren't enough." "That's not fair," she said, her voice rising. "I've admitted my mistakes. I've apologized. I'm trying to make things right." "Right." I laughed bitterly. "You can't erase what you've done, Becky. You can't undo a year of lies and betrayal with a few meals and apologies." She shook her head, tears pooling in her eyes. "I don't understand why you won't even try to forgive me. We've been together for 20 years, Henry. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It did," I said, my voice quieter now. "But you threw that away for someone who meant nothing to you." "That's what you said, right?" "He meant nothing." So why was he worth risking everything? Becky didn't answer. She just sat there, staring at the floor. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, and I realized in that moment that there was nothing left to say. The next morning, Holly brought me her school transfer forms. "Can you sign these?" she asked. "Of course," I said, taking the pen. "You sure about this?" She nodded firmly. "I'm ready to start over. I don't want to feel like I have to look over my shoulder all the time." Her words hit me hard. I realized she wasn't just running from Harrington. She was trying to escape the shadow of everything Becky's actions had cast over our family. "You're brave, you know that?" I said, handing the signed forms back to her. She smiled faintly. "I learned it from you." Later that day, Matt stopped by. We hadn't talked much since I told him about the affair, but he'd been checking in occasionally. "How's Holly doing?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "She's holding up," I said. "She's transferring schools. Wants a clean slate." Matt nodded. "Good for her. And you?" I shrugged. "I've got a plan. Once Holly's settled, I'm filing for divorce." He didn't look surprised. "Figured as much. You've been through hell, man. You deserve better." "Thanks," I said, though the words felt hollow. Deserve better? Maybe. But what I really felt was tired. Tired of the lies, the pretending, the endless cycle of anger and sadness. That night, Becky tried one last Hail Mary. She knocked on my office door, holding a photo album. "Do you remember this?" she asked, sitting down beside me. I glanced at the album. It was filled with pictures from our early years, our wedding, Holly as a baby, family vacations. She flipped through the pages, pointing out memories as if they were evidence of what we'd once had. "Look at us," she said, her voice soft. "We were so happy." I emphasized. Past tense. "Can't we get back to that?" she pleaded. "Can't we at least try?" I closed the album and set it aside. "Becky, I've been trying for 20 years. You were my world. But you took that and burned it down. You don't just get to rebuild on your terms." Her tears fell freely now. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For everything. For not being the wife you deserved. I wanted to feel something, anger, sadness, maybe even pity. But all I felt was emptiness." "It's too late, Becky." The final straw came 2 days later. Pam called me again. "Henry, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but Becky's still meeting Harrington. I saw them at the park this morning." My stomach dropped. "Are you sure?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Yes," Pam said firmly. "I'm sorry, but you needed to know." I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. Becky had sworn up and down that she'd ended things, that she was committed to fixing our family. But here she was, still sneaking around. It was like she couldn't help herself. That evening, I confronted her. "I know you're still seeing him," I said. Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "Pam saw you," I said. "At the park. With him." Her expression shifted from shock to defensiveness. "It wasn't like that. I just needed to talk to him." "Stop," I interrupted. "I don't care what your excuse is. I'm done, Becky. Completely done." She started to cry, but I walked away. For the first time in months, I felt clear-headed. There was no saving this. It was time to move on. The day Holly's transfer was finalized, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I'd done everything I could to protect her, but the weight of Becky's betrayal lingered like a storm cloud. Still, I kept my focus on the future. Holly deserved stability, and I was determined to give her that. Becky, meanwhile, had grown quieter. After our last argument, she stopped trying to win me back. She still went through the motions of being a mother and wife, but the spark of defiance and desperation was gone. Part of me wondered if she'd finally accepted that it was over. The surprise came a week later. I was sitting at the dining table, reviewing paperwork for Holly's new school, when Becky came in holding an envelope. "This came for you," she said, her voice unusually subdued. I opened it, expecting another bill or some generic mail. But as I unfolded the paper, my stomach sank. It was a formal complaint from the school board. Harrington had filed it, claiming I'd harassed him and made him feel unsafe at his workplace. Becky paled when she saw my reaction. "What is it?" I slid the paper across the table. "Harrington's trying to retaliate." Her eyes widened as she read it. "Oh my God. Henry, I didn't know he would. I cut her off. You didn't know? Or you didn't care? Because this is what happens when you drag a man like that into your life. Her face crumpled, but I didn't stick around to comfort her. I went straight to my lawyer the next morning. She reassured me the complaint was weak, but it was still a threat I had to address. Harrington wasn't just a bad person. He was dangerous, manipulative, and now, actively trying to ruin my life. A few days later, another unexpected twist came. Holly came home from her new school, her face lit up with excitement. "Dad, guess what?" "What's up?" I asked, smiling at her energy. "They're offering me a spot on the debate team." I didn't think I'd qualify because I'm new, but they said they loved my application and want me to join. "That's amazing, Holly," I said, pulling her into a hug. For the first time in months, I saw her genuinely happy, and it filled me with hope. That night, as I was preparing dinner, Becky approached me. She looked nervous, like she was about to drop another bomb. "Henry, I need to tell you something." I braced myself. "What now?" She hesitated, then said, "I've been thinking about leaving." I blinked, surprised. "Leaving? What do you mean?" "I've been looking at apartments," she said quietly. "I know you're planning to divorce me when Holly leaves, and I think it's better if I go sooner. Give you two some space." I stared at her, trying to gauge her intentions. Is this about guilt? Or is it about Harrington? She shook her head. "It's not about him. I ended things for real. This is about facing reality. I've done enough damage, and maybe it's time I stopped pretending things can go back to how they were." Her words were unexpected, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "If that's what you think is best," I said finally. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'll stay close for Holly. But I think it's time." A week later, Becky moved out. The house felt different without her, quieter, emptier. But there was also a sense of relief, like a storm had finally passed. Holly adjusted quickly, focusing on her new school and debate team. She seemed lighter, freer, and seeing her thrive gave me strength. The final surprise came a month later. I got a call from the school board. They'd conducted a full review of Harrington's complaint and his conduct. It turned out I wasn't the only one who'd had issues with him. Several parents and staff had come forward with concerns, and the board decided to terminate his employment. When I told Holly the news, she burst into tears, not out of sadness but relief. "He's gone?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Gone," I confirmed. "He won't bother us again." In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding. I found a small apartment, started taking Holly on weekend trips, and reconnected with old friends. Life wasn't perfect, but it was moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. The real surprise? One evening, as I was sorting through some old papers, I found an envelope tucked into a book Becky had left behind. Inside was a letter. It read, "Henry, I know I can never undo what I've done, but I want you to know I'm truly sorry. For the lies, the betrayal, and for putting you and Holly through so much pain. You didn't deserve any of it. I've been working with a therapist, trying to understand why I did the things I did. It doesn't excuse my actions, but I've realized how much I let my own insecurities control me. I was selfish, and I hurt the people I love most. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day you'll see that I'm trying to be better. For Holly. And maybe even for myself. Thank you for everything you gave me. I'll always regret not valuing it more. Becky." I sat there for a long time, staring at the letter. It didn't change anything, it couldn't, but it gave me a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Becky was gone from my life, but maybe, in her own way, she was trying to make amends. And for me? It was time to finally let go of the past and embrace whatever came next.